Cliff May, welcome. Cliff's a dear friend and has really distinguished himself as the founder and president of FDD. It's the go-to think tank if you really want to know what's happening in the United States, in the world, and particularly in the Middle East. And Cliff, we've been the beneficiaries of both you and your colleagues over many years now. We've had visits from Jonathan Sanzer and Benem Bentaleblu, Emmanuel Ottolenghi, years gone by, Michael Ledid, and so on. So thank you to your organization and to you for keeping us briefed on the most salient developments in international affairs on a daily basis. And it was great to have you in Australia, I think even 7 or 8 years ago. So we're very grateful for all your efforts, very much looking forward to what you have to say today and bringing us up to date on the pressing issues in international affairs with the US confronting elections so very soon, and telling us what the approaches of both major parties and the respective leaders will be on the Middle East on the key issues, whether it's to do with Israel and the current UAE-Israel normalization agreement, what the heck is happening with Iran and the JCPOA. Is Lebanon imploding and Hezbollah still dominating, and will that continue? And so many other questions I know that you'll shed light on. Cliff, it's over to you to make your introductory remarks, which we're looking forward to, and the Q&A session to follow. Cliff.
Thank you, Colin. Good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks to all our friends at AIJAC and everyone else who's on this call. I'll open, as you said, with some brief remarks to kind of frame the discussion, set the table, and then we can move on to questions or conversations. And by the way, in addition to discussing the U.S. presidential campaign in the Middle East, we might want to talk about the direction of foreign policy more generally under either a second Trump administration or a Biden administration. And by the way, I'm happy to delve into other topics as well. As you may know, I write a weekly column for the Washington Times, and you can access that online. This week, I wrote about why Lebanon may be broken beyond repair. Last week, I wrote about America's European allies siding with Tehran, voting in the Security Council to make it easier for the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism to buy any conventional weapons it wants. Very disappointing. So, and also let me begin with this familiar caveat, and that is that past performance is no guarantee of future results. In the case of Donald Trump, before his election, he had no record on foreign policy and national security beyond some really rather vague statements. And I have to say, I've been surprised by his policies, and to be candid, I've supported most of those policies. His communication style, by contrast, in my view, leaves a great deal to be desired. As for Joe Biden, we know how he's voted while in the Senate, and he was a loyal supporter of President Obama's policies. Bob Gates, you may know, he served 8 presidents of both parties in various capacities. He was Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration. He once said that Joe Biden has been, I quote, wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades, close quote. But that's one man's opinion. I think you all know that personnel is policy. President Trump initially chose Rex Tillerson as his Secretary of State. That did not work out well. He then chose Mike Pompeo for that position, and Pompeo has been an important and I think positive influence on Trump's policy decisions ever since. The president has had more national security advisors than he's had wives, but all of them, Michael Flynn, H.R. McMaster, John Bolton, Robert O'Brien, have similar worldviews, not identical, but similar, not too far apart. It's likely Biden would choose for his national security cabinet from among Obama's people, among Bill and Hillary Clinton's people, and I hope I'm wrong about this, from Bernie Sanders' people. Senator Ted Cruz was very emphatic on this appointment the other day. I'm going to give you a quote from him. Ted Cruz said, "I believe foreign policy under the Biden administration will be driven by Bernie, who wants to slash our military spending and gut the Defense Department. It will be driven by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, who we see now with repeatedly anti-Semitic, anti-Israel comments. It is the Israel-hating far left that is dominant in the Democratic Party right now. Again, that's one man's opinion. It's also possible that Biden, if he is elected, will stand up to the left in his party. He won't need them again since he's unlikely to run for a second term. So if he has convictions himself that are not far left, he can disappoint Bernie and his gang. I'm not predicting that. I'm not in the predictions business. I'm sure you're familiar with Trump's record on Israel, recognition of Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, keeping America's longstanding and until now unfulfilled promise to move our embassy to Jerusalem, a peace plan that prioritizes Israeli security and does not provide Palestinian leaders with more concessions than past peace plans that were turned down by Palestinian leaders. Really, that means Yasser Arafat and Mohammed Abbas, that's all there's been. And a push, now bearing fruit, for normalization of relations between Israel and Arab states without a treaty or a peace plan in fruition with the Palestinian Authority, and certainly not Hamas. I want to quote to you one paragraph from the Trump administration's 2017 National Security Strategy. That's the document that sort of sets out what the administration's overall philosophy is. There's a classified version and an unclassified version. I haven't seen the classified version. This is unclassified. It outlines how the president and his team view the world and what policies are needed to face it in their view. I think it's useful for understanding how the administration sees the Middle East. Here's the quote from the document. For generations, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians has been understood as the prime irritant preventing peace and prosperity in the region. Today, the threats from jihadist terrorist organizations and the threat from Iran are creating the realization that Israel is not the cause of the region's problems. States have increasingly found common interests with Israel in confronting common threats. Again, that's from 2017. And you see it bore fruit in the UAE-Israel deal that's now being concluded. Also cheered by most Israelis was Trump's withdrawal from Obama's Iran deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, and the implementation of a maximum pressure economic sanctions campaign against Iran's rulers. Biden has indicated that he would enter the Iran deal and likely list some sanctions of some of the economic pressure to induce Iran's rulers to restart talks with him. Biden and others in his party are expressing growing support for reestablishing diplomatic ties with the Palestinians, meaning the PA, at least, and reinforcing the need to pay greater heed to Palestinian demands. The Democratic Party platform approved and ratified during the convention this month contained foreign policy planks, always does. Biden, of course, could ignore them. They're not binding on him, but they can provide clues as to future policy. Overall, the platform on foreign policy and most issues was pretty big. The platform commits to, quote, renew and reinvent America's engagement in the world by elevating diplomacy and building multinational coalitions to address global challenges. It asserts that, quote, the reinvention of American leadership demands we put democratic values at the core of our foreign policy, close quote. More specifically, it elevates a focus on the rights of women and girls and leadership on LGBTQ+ issues, supporting civil society around the world, defending press freedom, and combating human trafficking, among many issues. In the case of China, the platform promises to mobilize and lead, quote, international efforts to push back on malign behavior while also pursuing cooperation on issues of mutual interest like climate change and non-proliferation. The platform claims the party will be tough on China, will stand up to efforts to steal intellectual property, not been the case in the past. It promises to repair alliances and cooperate with international institutions. It calls for reducing military spending and an end to waste and fraud. Now, I've never met anybody who was in favor of waste and fraud. It also calls for bringing, quote, forever wars to a responsible end. I got to tell you, personally, I hate that phrase, which Trump also uses. And if you want to discuss why, if it's not clear to you, just ask later on, and otherwise I'll assume you know. On Yemen, the Democratic Party platform calls for ending support for the, quote, Saudi-led war, close quote, in that country. It doesn't mention that Tehran backs the Houthi rebels. On Iran, it rejects regime change as a U.S. policy goal. Trump administration never quite stated that as a regime goal. Some people think it's implicit. Matt Duss, he's the foreign policy advisor for Senator Bernie Sanders, and he's someone I would call extremely anti-Israel. He had this to say about the platform. He said, I think the platform shows that they've taken a number of important progressive foreign policy priorities on board. There's a lot to celebrate here, both in terms of where the party is moving on these issues and of a broader unifying vision for the country. On the other hand, Biden reportedly ordered his advisors not to include any reference to Israeli, quote, occupation. That decision reportedly followed heavy last-minute lobbying by pro-Israel groups. Biden aides subsequently phoned Democratic leaders on the left and urged them to drop their demand to declare Israel an occupying power, arguing that the inclusion of the phrase threatened to undermine unity within the Democratic Party. Another way to say that, it would have antagonized some important Jewish donors. Okay, let me just mention a few other areas of policy difference. Regarding Iran in the second Trump administration, I think we can expect the economic pressure to continue and even accelerate. That might bring Iran's rulers to the table. That does not mean that Trump would necessarily be able to negotiate an agreement that would end their ambitions, their nuclear weapons development program, which they've never acknowledged exists, their sponsorship of terrorism, their threats against Israel, some of them genocidal, their desire for an empire, the Shia version of a caliphate, properly called an imamate. Regarding jihadi terrorist groups, Trump has been fairly muscular. To date, he's eliminated such top terrorists as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, Hamza bin Laden, Osama's heir, Qasim al-Raimi, a terrorist who led al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and oversaw plots against the US, and of course, Qasem Soleimani, leader of the Islamic Republic's expeditionary al-Quds force, which has quite a bit of American blood on its hands. Dozens of lesser-known terrorist threats have been eliminated since 2017. Biden can note that the Obama administration neutralized Osama bin Laden himself. However, it's been reported, credibly, that his advice to Obama was don't go, meaning he didn't think the operation to capture or kill bin Laden should be launched, at least not at that time. Nadia Shadlow, who is Deputy National Security Advisor under H.R. McMaster, recently wrote, Trump's departure from traditional ways of talking about and conducting foreign policy stem from an embrace of the uncomfortable truth that visions of benevolent globalization and peace-building liberal internationalism have failed to materialize, leaving in their place a world that is increasingly hostile to American values and interests. This is most clear vis-a-vis China. In the past, Democratic and Republican administrations alike have subscribed to the theory that as China became wealthier, it also would become more moderate, more liberal. So it was in U.S. interest to help China become wealthy. The Trump administration, and particularly H.R. McMaster and Nadia Shadlow, concluded that this theory had been proven incorrect over many years, and that it was necessary to recognize that China sees itself as an adversary, and that China, under this Communist Party of China, has hegemonic ambitions, indeed, that it intends to dominate Asia, and over time replace the US as the preeminent global leader. Until quite recently, Biden still held the older view of China. He's been sounding tougher lately, whether that signals that he's changed his mind for real, or whether this is a change tailored for the campaign, I'll leave to you. President Trump has made no friends in Western Europe. He is skeptical about the value of NATO, an organization in which few members spend what they're required to spend, where few have maintained serious military capabilities. The recent removal of some US forces from Germany has been condemned as a breach in the fabric of the alliance of liberal democracies. On the other hand, it also can be viewed as a sort of shot across Germany's bow a time when Germany is pursuing Nord Stream 2, an energy deal that will make Germany more dependent on Russia, a time when Germany is contributing relatively little to the collective security, and de facto voting on the Security Council recently in favor of making it legal and easy for Iran's rulers to acquire conventional weapons. So a final thought, foreign policy is what I care about and what you care about, but it's seldom a top issue for American voters. Right now, the pandemic, the economy, the rioting and looting and violence taking place in a long list of American cities, Trump's personality, Biden's cognitive acuity, those are probably weighing more heavily on most voters' minds, particularly in the swing states likely to determine the outcome of the November elections. In a poll this month by the Pew Research Center, the economy was ranked as the most important issue, with 79% of registered voters saying it was very important to how they'll vote. The next top issues were healthcare and Supreme Court appointments. Foreign policy issues ranked 6th on the list, but with 57% of registered voters saying it was very important to their vote. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to your questions and our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. I'll now hand over to Dr. Colin Rubenstein to ask the first question. Stand by,
I think
Colin.
you're on mute, Colin. There you go. Now you're still on mute.
There I go. Okay. Thanks very much, Cliff, for those illuminating remarks and that overview, sketching the scene for us. I'd like to just pick up on one of the last comments you made about the centrality of the Iran issue. I mean, you've rightly criticized the Europeans for failing to support US efforts to extend the arms embargo on Iran. And we know they've rejected the US right to activate a snapback of sanctions on Iran under UNSCR 2231. Now, just wondering, number of things. Can the US pressure campaign on Iran to renegotiate the nuclear deal really succeed when Europe chooses the interests of Iran, essentially, over the US and the Gulf states? And, you know, to add to that, Biden, as you've said, has said that if he wins, the US will rejoin the very flawed JCPOA. So can you identify any steps the Trump administration can take before November that would ensure that in the event Biden wins, all the sanctions and effort they're put into pressuring Iran to renegotiate the nuclear deal would fix the problems of the JCA, wouldn't be wasted after Inauguration Day? And really, is it practical for the US to simply rejoin the JCPOA at this stage, as Biden seems to suggest? And if so, in a way, what policies might a Biden administration pursue that could be reasonably successful in controlling Iran's rogue behavior, while, you know, they'd be differentiating themselves from the Trump approach, which is what they obviously want to do? So there's a bag of questions in there, but really disappointment about the failure for the US to garner support on extending that arms embargo on Iran, and controversy over the snapback procedure that they've initiated and where that's likely to go. This is a huge, huge issue, as you well know.
Yeah, so there's certainly disappointment, because the easiest thing for that our partners in Europe, our friends in Europe, the E3, UK, certainly in France, Germany, the easiest thing to do would have been say, yeah, we're going to have to extend the arms embargo. There's all sorts of reasons we should do it. This remains, their behavior is still rogue. Last thing we want to do is make it easy for them to give more weapons to the Houthis, more weapons to Hezbollah, do more killing in Syria. I mean, that should have been easy, and they just didn't have the spine to do it. And their approach to the Islamic Republic of Iran, I would call accommodationist and based on appeasement. It was very disappointing. And now the U.S. has said, okay, you didn't do that, that's fine, but there is a UN Security Council resolution. President Obama and Joe Biden bragged about it when they were trying to sell this deal to the Congress, which didn't, and the public, neither of which bought it. And so we can snap back sanctions unilaterally, absolutely can, under this separate UN Security Council resolution, which allowed the Security Council to embrace the JCPOA. Obama went to the Security Council instead of going to Congress to get approval for it. I was among those, and we'd have to be pretty critical of that. I'm not going to run down everything about why this Security Council resolution is quite separate from the JCPOA and why we have this right, but it's pretty clear. Contract's a contract, whether people understood it or not, and the U.S. probably will snap back. Now, that doesn't mean it'll be recognized, but I think the U.S. will put additional pressure, and it's going to be disappointing that our allies will side with the Islamic Republic of Iran against us here again, but there will be additional pressure put on Iran because the businesses will not want to get back in bed with Iran and get sanctioned by the United States. In terms of what can be done vis-a-vis the possibility of a Biden administration, there are things that FDD has pushed for quite a few years and have been successful. If the Biden administration says, okay, we want to take loads of sanctions off of Iran because we think their behavior will be much better once the money starts to flow to them, I think that's a very flawed theory. I can tell you why. Well, the basic reason why is once there were tough sanctions in place until the interim agreement. When Obama got the interim agreement, he lifted sanctions. We never got another concession. We gave concessions all the way for the next 2 years until the JCPOA was finalized. So I don't think that's right. But some of these sanctions will be hard for Biden to lift because many of the sanctions that have been put on, and we push for this, are for human rights violations and other malign behavior by this regime. And it'll be very difficult and he'll have to go to Congress to get them removed. And Congress will have to say, yeah, we impose these sanctions because of Iran's support for terrorism. We're going to lift them now, even though we don't think the terrorism has stopped. In other words, these are sanctions that are in place, not related to the nuclear development program. So there's that. Having said that, again, it really matters a lot. Presidents have a lot of power. Elections matter. If Biden really wants to accommodate the Islamic Republic, he'll make great efforts to do that. He will, as our European friends have done, overlook the many, at least 5, serious violations of the JCPOA by the Islamic Republic, at least that many. So I doubt he'll keep pressure on. I think it'll be more of an accommodationist policy. How far that will go, I don't know. I can't predict. It'll depend a lot. Who does he pick as a Secretary of State? Is it somebody who's accommodationist or somebody who's harder? In the sort of Biden camp, as I say, pulling from Obama, pulling from Clinton, you have people like Jake Sullivan, who I think is a pretty reasonable guy and who understands the dangers. Again, if you get somebody like Matt Duss coming from Bernie Sanders, then it's going to be very bad. Susan Rice, I think she's got a place in this administration. I'm not confident that she's going to want to be tough on Iran. So the answer is the Biden administration is a mystery. I could guess, but it would be no more than that.
Thanks, Cliff. Just a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask Cliff a question, you can use the raised hand feature in Zoom. You will be able to do that by going to the bottom of the participant list and you'll see the raised hand feature. If you'd like to ask a question in chat, you can do that privately to me or to the group as well. And actually, that's where I'll start because it's a nice addition to the end of your your recent answer, and that is what type of role in foreign policy terms do you see Biden's VP choice in Kamala Harris having? Will she have a role in foreign policy? And extending to that, if she does her position or her stated position on the Middle East matter?
Yeah, this again is something we don't know because there have been vice presidents who have been, like Dick Cheney, very involved. And there have been vice presidents who have been kept out of it entirely by the Secretary of the State, the National Security Advisor, and the president has said, this is not your job. I want you to handle this or that or the other or nothing at all. Vice President Biden, when he was Vice President Obama, he had special authority for Ukraine and China. You can judge for yourself how well those portfolios were handled. So we don't know about her. And I don't think we know a lot about her foreign policy. She was an attorney general in California, member of the Senate. She is fairly progressive, fairly left-wing, I would say. You may know she has a Jewish husband. I do not know his positions on all these things. I'm not sure he's been particularly public about them. I don't know if on Israel or something like that, he is somebody who cares about the issue or would have an influence on her because he's Jewish. That tells us nothing, I would say, especially within the American context. I think she would probably be somebody who would be in favor, as the Democratic platform states, of reducing military expenditures, especially at this time. And I think that's dangerous because I think at a time of when we're being challenged by the People's Republic of China, at a time when Russia is using its military to great effect, at a time when we still have terrorism in the form of Al-Qaeda, in the form of the Islamic State, doesn't have territory, but it has fighters. We still have North Korea with nuclear weapons developing missiles. I think we need a very strong military that can deter our enemies and adversaries. And the weaker we are, the less likely we are to deter. If we can't deter, then we're more likely to be challenged. And if we're challenged with a weaker military, it will be much more costly in blood and treasure to defeat those who decide to challenge us. So that's what I can say about Kamala Harris. I think, her foreign policy expertise is not, I think we can conclude, the reason Joe Biden picked her. And I don't think we know exactly what kind of influence she will have on him on this regard.
Thank you for that, Cliff. I'll now hand over to Dr. Zvi Fleischer.
G'day, Cliff. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about the UAE deal and its sort of effects on the Democratic Party in the U.S. with Democratic leaders. We know that Obama's Secretary of State, John Kerry, invested a lot of time into police initiatives on the peace process and going back. And he had a speech at the Democratic Convention where he sort of seemed to double down on his model that says the Israeli-Palestinian issue is central to the Middle East. I was wondering if Biden has welcomed the UAE deal with Israel. Is there any sign that some of the foreign policy leaders in the Democratic Party will be rethinking their traditional view that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is central to everything in the Middle East in the wake of the UAE deal and the evidence that Israel and the Sunni Arab states are now basically allies against Iran, with the Palestinians a secondary issue?
I haven't heard any Democrats say that. I think some of them are smart enough that they must understand that, at least to some extent. We've had years and years of trying. Keep in mind that this is the first time an Arab country has made peace with Israel in over a generation, over 25 years. I think since 1994, right? And interestingly, this is the other two examples, Jordan and Egypt. Those are both countries that went to war with Israel, lost, and knew that they could not fight again, and thought, what can we get by not agreeing? For Sadat, yes, it's wonderful to praise him, I do, but he wanted the Sinai back. Huge piece of land, has oil, all sorts of things. And the only way he's going to get it back was by making peace with Israel, and he didn't think, I'll go to war with them again and I'll get it back. That wasn't going to happen. And the Israelis were willing to give it up for a piece of paper. And so it worked. Now, so there was, that's how peace was made in those last two times. What's been going on for quite a few years is that Arab states, more and more of them, have been recognizing the fact that Israel is not a serious enemy. It's a convenient enemy because it's one that will never put a missile on your breakfast plate for no good reason. By contrast, the Islamic Republic of Iran is involved in a conflict with the Arab states. It's Islamic Republic of Iran is Shia and is Persian dominated. This is a conflict that's been going on for about 1,400 years. There's no good peace process to resolve it. And they know that Iran, with this regime, is an existential threat to the Saudis, to the Emiratis, to the Bahrainis, possibly to the Omanis and others. Jordan knows that the Jordanian king knows he would not be king for long if the neo-colonialist, neo-imperialist ambitions of the Islamic Republic were to be fulfilled. So there have been good relations between Israel and these countries, increasingly military, quietly, and intelligence and all that. Now, part of what happened here is what? The Arabs really, really, really didn't want to see Netanyahu go ahead and annex, or as the Israelis prefer to say, and more precisely say, extend sovereignty to about 30% of the West Bank, which they were going to do, and they were going to have leave to do it from the Trump administration. I think Netanyahu and others thought this is a historic and unique opportunity. We must take it. There'll be lots of shouting and screaming, and then it'll fade away. And in 10 years, it'll be very important that we've done this, so let's go ahead with it. And the Arab states really didn't want to do it. And by the way, it'd be terribly inconvenient for them, maybe even dangerous. So the idea arose. I won't go into the whole detail, though I know. Okay, what if the UAE, for example, could have been Bahrain, but there's reasons the UAE were to say to Netanyahu, going into the Trump administration, you don't go ahead and annex. We don't want you to do that. And let's go ahead and we'll have normalization of relations. How about that as a deal? It's a win for Trump. It's a win for Israel, and it's a win for the United Arab Emirates on a number of levels. Not least that even while they're being blasted by a lot of people, they can say, we were the ones who stopped the Israelis from annexing 30% of the West Bank. Not you, us. We got this done. And now we can also keep in mind, for years, all the 21 states in the Arab League agreed Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth. Right now, in the entire Middle East, there's one nation and one nation only that has the determination and the military capabilities to stand up to the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'm telling you, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, they don't want Israel to disappear from the map. And they're frustrated with the Palestinians. On one hand, you got Hamas. They think Hamas is an awful organization. They're against the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is an expression of that. And they find that Mahmoud Abbas, they're irritated with him, frustrated, because he won't lift a finger, he won't negotiate, he doesn't want to make peace with the Israelis. It's too late for him. That's not the legacy he seeks. They're frustrated with him. So they went ahead and did it, and maybe other countries are going to do the same. The Sudan is a possibility. Bahrain's certainly a possibility. Oman's a possibility. So it's historic for a lot of reasons. There's going to be a lot more relations, and a lot of things that the Emiratis and the Israelis can and will do together. The Emiratis are rich. The Israelis have great technology. You know all that, all kinds of things. And again, they have been friendly. And I've been to the Emirates. Probably a lot of you have. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I don't think Saudi Arabia could go first for some reasons that are pretty obvious to do with the religious establishment in that country. But the Saudis had to give permission to the Emiratis to do this quietly, and they sort of praised it. So it's a big breakthrough, and it's a big win, and people are, and I don't know whether it changes the thing. I can't believe somebody like Ambassador Shapiro, Obama's ambassador to Israel, he's a very smart guy. I know him. I have to think that his thinking has been altered somewhat by this. How that will change the actions if and when he's in a Biden administration, I expect he would be. That I can't tell you.
Thanks for that, Cliff. I'll now hand over to Anthony Cohen.
Thank you, Clifford, for your insights. Watching the American election from a distance is a bit difficult, and the election is going to be held with COVID still around us, and also there seems a lot of street violence in many parts of America. In the context of that, can you explain to us any validity over Trump's concern about postal voting?
It's difficult to monitor close up too, and I think look, absentee voting we've had for years. That is not a problem. What would be a problem is to try to put essentially the post office in charge of everything, and all the voting go through. There's no good reason to do it. People line up. People go to the store. They wear masks. They go to protests, they wear masks or they don't wear a mask. The idea that they can't go to the polls. Now you can, again, anybody, I got it in the mail today, if I want to ask for an absentee ballot, I can request one. Perfectly okay. Now, by the way, my wife was pointing out, if we throw it away and don't tear it up, somebody could take it and request it, and I guess who could get it, I don't know, and use it. But what you don't want to have is people just massive numbers of ballots going out by the mail and trying to come through the post office, which isn't the most efficient organization in the country. And we've seen mail-in balloting take place in other locations in the U.S. Fairly recently and not work out very well. So it's sort of an inducement and to fraud and abuse if you were to totally do it that way. I do think we're going to have a problem with legitimacy whatever happens. I think that's very possible. I think we are having these riots by I would say, very left-wing forces. Yes, there are peaceful protesters, but there are also, the peaceful protesters are not burning, they're not looting by definition. They're not trying to blind or kill cops, and all that's going on in these cities. And the administrations, the governing administrations of these cities, for the most part, have refused to do anything about it. And all those administrations, in every instance, we're talking about democratic urban administrations, and they have been in that place for years and years and years. There are no two-party systems in cities like Minneapolis and Seattle and Portland. That's for reasons we can discuss or not. That's long gone. So I don't expect this to be easy. And we do have the Russians and probably the Chinese and probably the Iranians, if they can make this harder for us, if they can, it's in the Russians have always, going back to the Soviet days, wanted to have people in America doubt the credibility of the democratic system, to think it just doesn't work, it can't work. Putin is not an aspiring Democrat any more than Xi Jinping is, any more than Ayatollah Khamenei is. They are all confirmed authoritarians. They think democratic governance is really kind of silly and passé, and it was never a good idea, and the experiment they'd like to see end as soon as they can. So I think we're going to have I would like to think that things are going to go peacefully, but and be nice and be easy transition. We've had that for a lot of years in this country. More or less, we had hanging chads, and we've had various hiccups before. But I think we should tighten our seatbelts this time around.
Thanks, Cliff. I'll now take, I'm going to link two questions that are on sort of similar topics from the chat. So both questions relate to the consequences of a potential Biden win. The first goes to the, I guess, the parting gift of the Obama administration with UN Security Council Resolution 2334. So do you see that a Biden administration will have a similar position vis-a-vis the settlements as what the Obama administration had when it left office? And the second question is relating to Biden's position on Iran and what that means for potential Israeli action. So the question is, does a Biden presidency increase the risk of an Israel-Iran war?
Yeah, a couple of things. I don't know that Biden necessarily approved of what Obama did with the help of Samantha Power on 2334. That was a blow to the solar plexus of Israel. That resolution essentially let people say, even though this is not entirely accurate, I can tell you why, that Israeli presence, not just in the West Bank, not just in East Jerusalem, but even at the Kotel, at the wall, is illegal. They have no right to be there whatsoever. Jews have no right, Israelis have no right to be even at the holiest sites of Judaism, the most historic and ancient sites. That was a terrible thing to do. And a resolution like that, there's no way to repeal it. It doesn't happen. The best thing you could do to negate it was what Trump did. And if you think about it, by saying, we're moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because we think that's the capital. We accept that. We recognize that as the capital of Israel. That's part of why that gesture was so important. It was the best way that I have ever heard, or that I can imagine, that I know of. No one I've heard and talked, a lot of people suggest otherwise, that you could not nullify the resolution 2334, but come close to nullifying it. And that's very important. Now, would Biden move the embassy out of Jerusalem? I doubt it. I doubt it. In terms of Israel going to war with Iran, I think that the Biden administration would make it very difficult for Israel to do that, unless Israel were attacked first, and it was clearly responding, but not if it's preemptive. I think it would be a challenging 4 years in that regard. I don't know if they would stop Israel from doing anything, other things that it's been doing. Who knows the cause of the explosions we've seen not that long ago in Iran? We do know the Israelis, I think, have been destroying attempts to build forward operating bases in Syria. We know the Israelis are very concerned about Hezbollah. You all know that Hezbollah has, since the end of the war in 2006, installed something like 150,000 missiles pointing at Israel, even though the war ended with the UN Security Council resolution that said the IDF must withdraw and Hezbollah must be disarmed. You've got UNIFIL, which comes up for renewal. The US may, we certainly think, should veto that renewal. It spends $500 million a year. It's got 10,000 forces, and it does nothing of value except maybe provide a liaison service. Probably a dozen people could do that. Liaison between Lebanon and Israel, between Hezbollah and Israel. But they're really human shields. They don't do anything that they're supposed to do. They don't fulfill the resolution. The French want it to stay. They have an investment there. French haven't been particularly friendly to us. I don't think we should do that for them myself. What the Israelis are more worried about than the 150,000 missiles that are dumb missiles are approximately 300 smart missiles. Precision-guided munitions, they're called. And these are missiles that have a GPS device in them and can be controlled, and they could overcome Iron Dome. They could overwhelm it and they could evade it because they're smart and they maneuver. I don't think the Israelis can leave them in place too much longer. I would not be surprised, I don't know anything, if the Israelis said sometime between now and January, if we know where those 300 are, we're going to remove them. Lebanon is in terrible, terrible shape right now. As you know, there was that catastrophic explosion in the port, billions of dollars worth of damage, hundreds dead, thousands injured, hundreds of thousands homeless. We don't quite know what caused it, but Hezbollah, if they don't control the port, they have free reign there. In addition to that, we've just done an FDD. We've had a study done of the Lebanese economy. We found that the conclusion is that it's $93 billion in debt. 93 billion. People don't understand what that means. The IMF, its biggest rescue operation ever 2 years ago was Argentina. 57 billion they came up with. Now we're talking 93. Argentina's population is over 45 million. Lebanon's under 7. I don't see the IMF doing it. I don't see the US, certainly under the Trump administration, authorizing that. The French, Macron wants to raise money. He won't say a bad word about Hezbollah. From his Riviera retreat a few days ago, he did a fundraiser for Lebanon, raised, I think, reported $300 million. Consider $300 million is not a dent into a $93 billion plus several billion report dent. And the other thing we found in this report, the banking system is corrupt. Not a little corrupt, not some banks corrupt, entirely corrupt, including even the central bank. So it's not even clear how you would go about injecting this into the economy, which is not a very productive economy anymore. Lebanon is in terrible shape. It's very sad, and cannot rule out the possibility that Hezbollah says, so the best thing to do, let's go to war with Israel. Then we blame Israel, and the international community will come and try to buck us up and give us money. I don't know what Nasrallah is thinking. I don't know what he's discussing with Ali Khamenei and Tehran. Their logic is beyond my ken.
Thank you for that. There's no doubt that all eyes are on Lebanon at the moment. I'll now hand over to AIJAC's Aaron Shapiro.
Yes, hello. Following up on your Lebanon question, I think up until now, the U.S., ever since the explosion of the Hezbollah blowing up the U.S. Marine barracks in the 1980s, has really stepped away from Lebanon. And when we hear about what they do for Lebanon, it's very inadequate, really. They bolster the army, which doesn't really stand up to anything in the south of the country, and nobody expects a change there anytime soon, except right now Lebanon's very vulnerable to change. Do you see in the Trump administration, or perhaps even in Biden's own advisors, any sort of ideas of how we can, the U.S. I should say, can start getting some better outcomes out of Lebanon, given the huge militarization and of South Lebanon in violation of all the UN resolutions, and also how they've turned South Lebanon into a big missile arsenal.
Yeah, and keep in mind that the Lebanese armed forces, which the U.S. continues to support, is weaker than the militia that Hezbollah has. Hezbollah is the only political party that has a militia, and it's so strong that the Lebanese armed forces does not dare to challenge or even offend it. And I can tell you for sure that no one in the current administration has any idea how to help Lebanon. I mean, they're going to provide relief assistance to people who are homeless. They're going to send tents and blankets and food. Of course, a lot of things can't get in through that port right now, which is a problem too. But no one has any idea what you do. That's what the paper we just did look at, to try to find what could you do if you want to do. I think it would have to start with Hezbollah being disarmed and stepping down. There are things that, I mean, I would love to see Macron, who cares so much. I mean, the French care a lot about Lebanon. It was a former French possession, as you know, protectorate. He's friendly with the supreme leader. He should say, look, this is your pit bull. You need to pull it off, or we cannot really help you. And I would like to see the Europeans in general say Hezbollah must disarm and must step out of power before we can help. But again, I see no appetite in Europe for standing up to the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's appeasement and accommodation. I don't know what Joe Biden would do, but I'm not confident that he would. On the other hand, I don't see how he helps Lebanon. I do not see Joe Biden saying, yeah, we're going to come up with, or we'll help the IMF come up with $93+ billion and find a way to put it into a country that is controlled by a terrorist organization subservient to the Islamic Republic of Iran. I don't see him going that far. I hope I'm correct in that. But I don't. But no one. If there's a way out, there may be. I don't know what it is. I don't know anybody who does.
Thank you for that. I'll now hand over to Ron Porat.
Hello, hi. Thank you, Cliff, very interesting. I wanted to ask, everybody's talking about the American presidential elections. There's another elections in Iran next year. And also the actual government in Iran or the regime is going through a seismic change from towards something being controlled almost completely by the Revolutionary Guards Corps. The question is, the next administration in Washington facing this new regime, what are the implications? And specifically, given that I read some draft of the Democratic platform noted that America is against regime change. So what does it tell you about the sort of toolbox that the next administration will have?
Well, starting at the end of that, the Democratic Party platform said the Democratic Party does not favor regime change in Iran. Trump administration has never said it's for regime change. I think people have inferred that it is. Mike Pompeo had 12 demands of the Islamic Republic, demands such as stop supporting terrorism, stop building nuclear weapons. People who are sort of, I would say, solicitous towards the Islamic Republic on the left would say, well, you cannot expect Tehran to meet those demands. That's just unworkable. But imagine, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. It's just unworkable. It's too much of a demand to say, don't support terrorists, don't support people who, I guess Hezbollah don't, but that's what they say. And the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration, again, is the spokesman would say, all we're trying to do is put a lot of pressure on them. So they say, okay, we'll sit down, we'll come to the table, and we'll try to verify with you for real that we're not building nuclear weapons, that we're not on a path to nuclear weapons and the missiles that can deliver them, not just in the Middle East, but anywhere in the world, including the targets in the US. We'll do that, because after all, they could say, we've always said we don't want nuclear weapons. We've insisted we have no nuclear weapons development program, although they do, that's a lie, and we allow them to lie. We don't say, no, you do have. Look at what the Israelis stole from Tehran when they picked up the nuclear archive and took it out of the country. We know what you're doing. We know what you're continuing to do. but anyhow, the other thing is, yes, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is old. He's not in good health. He's going to be replaced by a new supreme leader at some point, but there is no expectation that that will be a moderate who will want to be a member in good standing of the international community and set up cultural exchanges with the US. We have done some analysis of who the likely contenders are for the next supreme leader at FDD, and you can find that on our website. But again, none of them are people I think that we'd want to have dinner with.
Thanks, Cliff. I'll take the final question in the chat before I hand over to Jeremy Jones to finish off with a few of his own. And the question goes back to the UAE-Israel peace deal, and it pertains to the removal of annexation off the table as a condition to the normalization. If that wasn't removed off the table, if that wasn't the leverage that was used to bring the parties together, would normalization have happened? Would you see the potential of it happening before November, essentially before the next presidential election?
I would say clearly it would not have happened before November, except that the United Arab Emirates, among others, really did not want the Israelis to go through with this. It would make it harder for them to maintain the kind of cordial relations they have. Also because they support the Palestinians, and in their view, this makes it harder to, at some point, have a two-state solution with a reasonably viable Palestinian state. That I think they know, I'm sure they know, this can't be done while Mahmoud Abbas is presiding over Ramallah. They don't see much that can be done about that. So no, this was precipitated absolutely because there was a chit they could cash in at this point to get that done. I know that's true. I think that's absolutely clear that that's true. So you can say that by Trump having and Jared Kushner having the peace plan they have, and then essentially giving their hechsher to the Israelis to go ahead and you have nobody to make peace with. You go ahead and make your own plans, begin to establish your own borders, do what you need to do, apply sovereignty, apply Israeli laws, just go ahead. Again, that doesn't mean that something couldn't be given up later, by the way, in negotiations. Had they done that, because they could, like they gave up the Sinai, they could say, okay, for this peace deal, we're going to give up whatever it is applying Israeli sovereignty does not mean you cannot trade it later. You can, but you are establishing facts on the ground. Now, one more thing I have to add, because I think it's an important point. The language that Netanyahu eventually used was that they were going to, not that there would never be annexation under any circumstances. They were going to suspend, the Israelis are going to suspend the extension of sovereignty into these territories. Who knows what happens in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? You know, if Mahmoud Abbas at 94 is still running the Palestinian Authority and still not coming to the table, and it's been 20 years, it may be that whoever is Israeli prime minister at that point goes to the Emirates or whoever else they have peace with and say, look, we can't wait any longer. We're going to provide this following for the Palestinians. You can help as well. But frankly, our military is not going to be in control there. Our civilian government is. That's what we're going to do. If you want to break relations, go ahead. I don't think you want to. Again, the future is very uncertain. So this was a trade that came, and I have to think Jared Kushner gets a lot of credit. He's worked on that plan for a long time. I got a chance to talk to him about it. He kept his cards close to the vest, and he asked me questions. I talked to Jason Greenblatt about it. These guys were very serious. They started out knowing nothing. In the end, after asking a million questions, I thought they knew a lot. Jared became friends with the Emiratis, not least with Yusuf Al-Taiba, who is the ambassador of the UAE here in Washington, a very sophisticated, savvy guy who has the ear of Zayed bin Mohammed, the Sheikh of the Emiratis, and was able to bring this all to pass. And he brought it to pass again as a win for Trump, his father-in-law, but also his boss, and a win for Israel for sure. And it also allowed Netanyahu, without humiliation, not to go ahead when there was, I have to tell you, I know this, some discussion and some disagreement even inside Israel whether it was a useful idea to go ahead with the extension of sovereignty. I'm not sure Gantz was entirely in favor of it. I don't think the White House was of one mind on this, in the sense that David Friedman, I think our ambassador there, wanted to do it. I think Jared Kushner, this is my interpretation, reading the tea leaves, Jared Kushner thought this is not a good idea. I'd rather Bibi not do this. He figured out a way, they figured out a way, they had to help him figure out a way to make everybody win. And it's a good result at a time when we're not seeing a lot of good results in a lot of other places in the world.
Absolutely. And that's a good point to hand over now to Jeremy Jones to ask the final few questions.
Thank you. Thank you. We've had a number of questions sent in to us. I'm going to try to ask you 2 or 3 questions for short answers before the final question, if I may. The first one is that a draft of an agreement between China and Iran to partner on economic and even security issues recently came to light. And the questioner is curious what impact the news of this deal has made on Washington. So we'll go with that one next.
Yeah, it's had some impact. It's certainly not good news. It's not a friendly gesture by China, but we're not feeling, China's not feeling, the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, is not feeling friendly towards us, and we're not feeling friendly towards him. How much they can help the Islamic Republic of Iran, I don't know. I don't think it's a life raft. Maybe it's a life vest. At most, the Chinese, I don't see the Chinese investing billions and billions and billions. Price of oil is still very low. Chinese have been buying it all along. They've been one of the few buyers. We always knew that when the sanctions were imposed. And FDD had a lot to do with the sanctions architecture. But we knew there would still be buyers, but they'd all insist on a steep discount. The Chinese are very good bargainers. They're not doing, whatever they're doing for Iran, they're not doing out of the goodness of their hearts. It's not altruism. It's partly to diminish the US. I think that Xi Jinping, like Putin, thinks that any regime that is an irritant to the US, that distracts the US, that diminishes the US's power, is a regime that's worth supporting. And so there has been a de facto alliance between the authoritarians, Russia, China, Iran, even North Korea. And so it's not good news, but it only goes so far. It's certainly not going to bring a lot of European companies into Iran to do business so long as the US maintains sanctions pressure. But again, so long as the US maintains sanction pressure, the Trump administration will do that. Don't know for sure whether the Biden administration will do that or begin to ease pressure.
Thank you. The next question related broadly to Russia. Russia, with the problems with Ukraine, announcing overnight its assistance to its friends in Belarus, and obviously the role it's been playing in Syria. What are the attitudes of the contending next administrations to Russia?
Well, it's complicated because on the one hand, Trump has been very cozy with Putin. On the other hand, he's imposed pretty serious sanctions on Russia, more than anybody else, any other administration has. The previous administration, recall, tried to reset relations with Russia, with Putin, and that did not work out particularly well. Belarus, I don't think, Trump and Pompeo have certainly denounced what's going on there, and for listeners who don't know, I think you do, what happened there is you had an election earlier this month. Lukashenko, who's been the dictator for 26 years, said, I won by 80%. Nobody believed that. And so the people went out into the streets to demonstrate. There was a heavy crackdown, about 7,000 arrested, credible reports of terrible torture and other things. The demonstrations have continued. The person who probably beat him, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she fled the country to Lithuania with her 2 kids. We don't know how that's going to play out. As you say, Putin said, well, if it's spiraling out of control, I'll send in teams of law enforcement. He didn't say from which branch of government that would be. And we don't really know what's going to happen next there. Putin very much wants to keep Belarus within his sphere of influence, no question about that. I don't think he loves Lukashenko. I don't think those who are demonstrating against Lukashenko have made it very clear. They said, we're not anti-Russian, we're not pro-Russian, we're not looking to join the EU, nothing like that. We just want elections to be free and fair. We don't want our votes stolen, and they have been by a guy who's been in power for 26 years. We want him out. So, but how that plays out again, I can't quite predict. and Putin's being cagey. But Putin is always very cagey and rather shrewd.
And while you're not making predictions, the last question that came in before my question is about Democratic progressive candidates who have been winning some primaries. There have been a number of interesting contests recently. And although Biden got the top job, the question is, how close are we to the tipping point, if there is one, where for another generation, progressives coming in and controlling the levers of the Democratic Party?
I think it is a real and rather frightening possibility that we will see the Corbynization, as it were, of the Democratic Party, that we're seeing it. There are plenty of moderates in the Democratic Party. They seem unwilling, maybe afraid, to stand up to the far left. They like to call themselves progressives. I wouldn't, but they seem unwilling to stand up to the liberals. And they do well because in the primaries, for example, in Congress, in districts where there really are no Republican contenders, they have a lot of money from various sources, I don't know what, and they get their voters out there. And so people like AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she won her primary and will be reelected without question, even though, for example, Amazon wanted to come and put like 25,000 jobs in her district and she chased them out. You would think people would say, why are you doing that? We could use the jobs in our district. No, she won anyhow. And she and others on the far left of the party seem to be more and more in control. Nancy Pelosi certainly does not seem to be standing up to them in any way. And Chuck Schumer, who always thought of himself as a moderate, he wants to be majority leader. That's very important to him. So he is caving as well so that he won't be challenged. One thing I'll say about this election, I think a lot depends on the outcome in the Senate. If the Republicans hold the Senate, even if they lose the presidency, it'll be hard because the Senate can block things for the illiberals and the far left to get done what they want to get done. Packing the Supreme Court, for example, moving to socialist policies, all the Corbynization sorts of things won't probably happen if the Republicans hold the Senate. And then you got another election, at least for Congress, in 2 years. If the Biden administration is not popular, all sorts of things could happen. And then another election in 4 years, and you got possibly people like Nikki Haley running, very different. But should the Democrats clean the table, or if that's a phrase, if they should win the White House, win the Senate, and win the House, it's going to be something of a revolution in the United States, and you'll see the U.S. lurch far to the left, and I do think it's going to be tumultuous in this country as a result of that. Again, if the Supreme Court gets packed with leftist judges, and because what the Democrats have said they will do in the Senate is to get rid of the filibuster. If they get rid of the filibuster, it takes 51 votes to get anything done. Right now, it takes 60 realistically. Unless you can get 60 votes in the Senate, things can get blocked. And that's how it was meant to be. That's how the founding fathers meant it to be. The House is the hot tea, and the tea, the plate under that where the tea cools, that's the Senate, right? That's what was supposed to happen. If that changes, it's a whole different system of government in the U.S. And Katie bar the door, I don't know what happens, but I think it'll be a very difficult time in this country.
Thank you. And you've been very kind to stay with us all this time. Just one very last question, which I feel I have to ask. Attitudes of the incoming administrations, either the Trump or Biden, to allies such as Australia, and how the issues of working together with countries such as Australia on the Middle East and elsewhere.
And just say again, how will that play out, or how will?
There are different attitudes towards allies. Is there a difference,
well,
and what should Australians be looking for in this?
Well, look, I think both parties want to have allies. I think Trump is a difficult personality to get along with. We've certainly seen that in terms of how the Europeans view him. They find him very difficult. I think Trump takes the view that our allies need to be good allies. That's easier for the Australians to claim right now than it is for the French or the Germans to claim right now, speaking quite candidly. There may be things we don't have in common, but I think there's probably a pretty similar view on China, for example, and the threat China poses. It's a threat to Australia, certainly. I think the administration, and you know, Pompeo certainly wants to work with allies, but he wants allies to work with him as well, not just ask, but also to give. Biden, I think, will be more solicitous, less demanding. How much he'll provide, you know, part of what the question is, will, if the U.S. military becomes weaker, is the U.S. able to provide what, for example, Australia would like it to provide in the South China Sea? If the U.S. backs off and says, well, China has militarized various reefs that it's turned into islands, and we're not going to risk American ships, let the Australians take care of it. That won't be, that's a possibility. If Biden says, look, we're not going to sacrifice American lives over Taiwan, and we've always said there's a one China policy. I hope they don't do into Taiwan what they did to Hong Kong and maybe do it by force. But if they do, well, we don't, you know, what are we, I don't think that's our problem. We can't be the policeman of the world. So I think you can kind of see for yourself how this goes.
Thank you, Cliff. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for today.